begin by learning more about chapter 4. So last week, our section in chapter 4 that we spoke about was a little bit of a tangent because we spoke about the 4 levels of Torah learning and what those 4 levels are, and we explored the different experiences that a person has when you learn different parts of the Torah. And now we're going back to what the main theme of this chapter is. What's the main theme of the chapter? Is that the neshama, in order for the neshama to have an impact on this world, in order for the neshama to be effective, the neshama needs garments. Very similar to the human experience, right? When a human being wants to have an impact on this world, how does a human being have an impact on this world? Well, you've got to be acceptable to society. And in order to be acceptable to society, that includes the fact that you have to have appropriate clothing, appropriate garments. So in the same way as the physical human being needs to have garments in order to interface with the world, in exactly the same way the spiritual human being also has to have garments in order to interface with the world. And what are those garments? Those garments are thought, speech, and action. Okay, those are the 3 things. Thought, speech, and action. Those are the 3 garments that the neshama uses in order to interface with the world. Now, we have to remind ourselves that we're talking over here about the neshama. We're not talking about just an ordinary human being. We're not just talking about a part of the person that is kind of arbitrary or superficial. We're talking about the neshama over here. And the neshama is holy. It's not just spiritual, because there are many components of the world that are spiritual. It's not only spiritual. This is a part of us that is holy. This is a part of us that is godly. This is, as we learned in chapter 2, Chelek Eloika Mima'al Mamish. This is literally a piece of God from on high that's living inside a human form. That's what the neshama is. So now, if the neshama is going to interface with the world, then what do you think it wants to achieve? Now, I think we maybe need a little bit of backstory over here, just for a second. What exactly are we trying to convey? What exactly are we trying to achieve? So before we get to this chapter, let's go back to something that we touched on in chapter 1. If you remember, at the beginning of chapter 1, the Alter Rebbe asked this question. The Talmud tells us that before a human being is born, before your neshama comes down into this world, mashbi'in oisoi. They make that neshama take an oath, and the nature of that oath is that tehi tzadik ve'al tehi rasha, that you will be righteous and that you will not be wicked. Okay, double-barreled, right? You will be righteous, and you will not, just in case you didn't understand what that meant, you will not be wicked. Where is the neshama at that point in time? When this conversation happens, where is the neshama? What's the neshama looking through the catalog in the departure lounge, to see what does the destination look like? What kind of beaches do they have? What kind of restaurants do they have? Is that what the neshama is doing at this point in time? Where is the neshama at this moment when we're making the neshama take this oath? You will be a tzaddik, you will not be a rasha. It's one of the fascinating thoughts that the Alter Rebbe alludes to, even though he doesn't really address in that chapter. Where's the neshama at that point in time? The neshama is free. The neshama is free of stress. The neshama is free of temptation. The neshama does not have to worry about the tax rate or the petrol price or the traffic or ways. It doesn't have to worry about any of these things. What is the neshama doing 24/7 at that moment when it's made to take this oath that you will be a tzaddik? What is it doing? The neshama at that point in time is basking in heavenly bliss. That's what it's doing. It's enjoying exposure to God's radiance. Now, you and I don't really know what that means. It's a nice theoretical term for us to use. Basking in divine radiance. We have absolutely no concept of what that is. But suffice it to say that the neshama's experience at that point in time is beautiful, elevating, free, inspiring, all the wonderful adjectives that you would want to use. And then a neshama gets dispatched down here into this world. And that's why we're so curious about how do you make the neshama take an oath that it's going to behave in a certain way in an environment that it has no clue about. The neshama doesn't know what it is to be in this world. The neshama only knows exposure to God. The neshama only knows wisdom. It only knows clarity. It only knows holiness. It only knows right. It doesn't understand the capacity, the possibility for wrong. You take that neshama and you put it into this world. What do you think happens? Why do you think babies cry? What do you think they're crying about? The neshama comes into this world and says, oh my gosh, look what you've done to me. When the neshama took that oath to say, I will be a tzaddik, it wasn't a difficult oath to take because it only knew the reality of tzaddik. It only knew the reality of absolute dedication to God. Then it arrives. I was driving somewhere the other day and I saw a for sale sign on a property. And this for sale sign was exactly the classic stereotypical joke about an estate agent. What did it say on the sign? It said, renovator's dream. Renovator's dream. There's nothing that encapsulates the concept of selling a property better than that phrase. That's like when you look up the reviews on a place you want to go on holiday, and they say it's very rustic. Rustic means they don't have hot water. Rustic means that there are bed bugs. That's what rustic means. So the neshama gets told that you're going to come down into this world. And what's going to happen in this world? You enter into this world, it's going to be rustic. Spiritually rustic. That's what this world is. The neshama is all excited about it. Oh, that's fantastic. And then the neshama gets told it's a renovator's dream. The amount of impact, the potential that you could have in this world, in this physical world, what you could achieve. Here in heaven, you're a passenger. Here in heaven, you're in an orbit, a fixed orbit. You have this kind of a spiritual experience. You have that amount of exposure to godliness. It's very beautiful. It's very enjoyable, but you are not productive. Go down into the world, renovator's dream. So the neshama arrives in the world, it's so excited, pulling at the bit. The next thing, it wakes up in this human form, and this big, powerful, dynamic neshama has to cry just to get a little bit of food. This is what it's all about. This is what you promised me. And at that point in time, the neshama does not yet have developed garments to interface with the world. So the child cannot really have an impact on the world. The child can have an impact on its immediate environment. It can get its mother to do the most amazing things without uttering one word. But it can't make a difference. It can't make the renovator's dream come true. So the neshama needs garments. The neshama needs a system. It needs some kind of a set of tools that it could use to have an impact on this world. Now, the minute the neshama is put down into the body, as we already saw in chapter 1, it has a partner in its goal, in its objective, in its life journey. That partner is what we call the nefesh hachiyunis, the animating soul. In other words, that partner is the battery pack of the human being. That's the part that has to keep the human being alive. That is the part of the human being that has to ensure survival. That part of the so-called nefesh, that part of the soul, which is designed to keep humans alive, naturally has garments. It doesn't need to be given garments. Why? Because it's part and parcel of this world. It's from this planet. It's not an alien. It doesn't need garments. So it interfaces with the world as a matter of course. It's natural. And everything that it does and the way that it behaves is all impulsive and instinctive and natural. Because it's a natural species in the physical world, no different to any other animal. All of Darwinism is built on the concept of the nefesh hachiyunis. That there's a dimension of the human that appears to us as nothing more than a developed animal. The neshama is an alien. You often wonder, Jews have contributed such interesting things to society in every single sphere. Some of the most iconic elements of modern society and even of ancient society are Jewish in origin. So psychotherapy, Jewish. Relativity, Jewish. Superman is also Jewish in origin. And there's a whole theory about exactly what Superman is supposed to represent, the Jew that survives, because it's like a story post-Holocaust, right? So the society that he lived in is destroyed and he has to escape, or whatever the case is. I don't know if that is or isn't what motivated Superman, but somewhere deeply embedded in the Jewish psyche is the story of Superman. I'm from another planet. And when they discover me, they have to teach me how to behave on this planet, because I don't know. I have strength that is too powerful for this planet, and I can see things that are what the average person cannot see on this planet. And I could do either tremendous good if I know how to harness those powers, or I could be a little bit of a lost soul. So the neshama requires an interface. It requires means by which it could connect. What's the means by which it could connect? Thought to make sense of the world internally. Speech to share those thoughts externally. And action to actually touch the world. Now we're talking over here about the neshama. The neshama is only interested in one thing. Renovate his dream. The neshama is only interested in taking this mess of a world and turning it into the beautiful home that Hashem intended it to be. Cultivating a garden out of a jungle. That's all the neshama is interested in. The neshama doesn't care about the stock market. The neshama doesn't care about what season we're in. The neshama doesn't care about what the latest restaurant is. All it cares about is, how do we renovate this mess? How do we turn this world, which was designed with immense potential, to become aligned with God's intention? Therefore, when will the neshama use any of these three garments, thought or speech or action? Only when it could be used as a way to align with Hashem's dream. So if the thoughts are thoughts related to Torah, then the neshama is using the mind. And if the speaking is speaking words of prayer or words of Torah learning, then the mouth is being employed by the neshama. And if the behavior that the person is doing is the behavior of a mitzvah, then the human body is, at that moment, a vehicle and an interface for the neshama with the world. So these are the 3 points of entry. These are the 3 interfaces that the neshama uses for the world. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. 2 things that we're going to do, one this week and one, please God, still to come. We have to ask ourselves, number 1, you just told me that the neshama is so powerful. You just told me that the neshama comes from heaven. You just told me that the neshama lived with this absolute awareness and freedom and connection to God. And the moment it was put into this world, thought, oh my gosh, this is it? So you're telling me that the neshama has so much power and so much beauty and so much intensity, and it needs thought, speech, and action to get anywhere. Doesn't seem to add up. Doesn't seem to add up. It sounds like effectively what you're saying is, here is something brilliant, and the only way we can work with it is if we limit it to whatever you're able to think about, whatever you're able to speak about, whatever you're able to do. It doesn't add up. Okay, just imagine for 1 second, every single time that a person says, hang on, I just got to check. I think I got a message on my phone. Every single time that happens, you can imagine the neshama platzes. Oh, noch a message. Here we are trying to renovate God's world and align it with his ultimate purpose, bring infinity into the finite space, and you're looking at a verstunkene meme that somebody sent on a WhatsApp. Can you imagine the frustration of the neshama? So you're telling me that these garments, remember last time we said, not last time, 2 times ago, that a garment is ultimately disposable. You're telling me that that is what the neshama needs, and without it, the neshama is dysfunctional? That doesn't seem to make sense. So we have to address that issue. We have to address how it could be that something so superficial could have such a profound impact. However, before we can get to that, there's something else very important that we also have to address, and that is, at which point do you actually, as a human being, so you've got a neshama that is always connected to Hashem, it's always plugged in, 24/7. But as a conscious human being, you are not always aware of your neshama being plugged in. So as a human being, you're having moments of more inspiration, less inspiration, more connection, less connection. So as a neshama living inside a body, how do you know that you're having a meaningful connection? That's what we're going to focus on this evening. What helps us to have a meaningful connection with Hashem? So let's take a look. I'll just go back a drop. Okay. So last week we learned that the primary way that the neshama employs the power of intellect and the faculty of thought to connect to Hashem is by learning Torah. And we explained that learning Torah has 4 levels to it. And that also insinuates that if you are capable of learning Torah at a certain depth and you don't, then you're not fully expressing the potential of your neshama. But a human being is not just intellect. Remember, in the previous chapter, we learned that the neshama has 10 faculties. And in the same way as you have 10 faculties in the neshama, so you have 10 faculties in the nefesh chiyunis, the so-called animating, or as we'll later start to call it, the animal soul. So what are those 10 faculties? We said 3 of them relate to intellect. How do you engage the intellectual part of your soul? By learning Torah, relative to your abilities, relative to the depth and power of your neshama. Now we have to ask the question, how do you activate midos? How do you activate the other 7 faculties of your soul, which are completely different? They're what we call midos. Okay, let's understand for 1 second, what exactly are we talking about? What's the difference between intellect and midos? Some people translate midos as emotions, and I wonder sometimes if we do ourselves a disservice by using that translation, because emotions, when people hear the word emotions, they immediately think about being emotional. That's what they think when they hear emotions. And that's not accurate. When we say midos, what we really mean is when you have a meaningful connection with something. So if it's your nefesh achiyunis, if it's your animal or animating soul that has a feeling, the feeling that it has will always be primitive. Why? Because that soul is primitive. That soul has a single job. The single job is keep the human being alive. That's the job of that soul. Keep the human being alive. That's pretty primitive. I mean, I know that some people think that maybe that's very advanced. In reality, that's pretty primitive. Keeping the human being alive. So therefore, the feelings associated or the attitudes associated with that soul will be quite primitive. For example, one of the primary midos is the midah of love, right? As we're about to discuss. We're about to discuss love. So the midah of love. What is love? Love is a personal reaction that I have to something that I would like to have more. That's effectively what love is. So, in a more mature version, it's not something, it's someone. That's a mature version of love. But in a primal version of love, chocolate. I love chocolate, yes? Everybody knows that chocolate is the official food of the Tanya Chapter. Right? We use it in all our examples. So when a person says, I love chocolate, is that a deep, meaningful, spiritual expression of self? No. It's primitive. Why does a person like chocolate? Because chocolate's good to me. Chocolate never hurts me. Well, sometimes if I overdo it, maybe. Chocolate is a comfort food. Chocolate is a nice reward that a person could use if they feel that they deserve it for whatever reason. So what's primitive about it? What it does for me. How the chocolate services me. That is a primitive kind of love. It's not altruistic. It's not deeply emotional. It's purely contractual. Chocolate, you do something for me, therefore I love you. Sadly, some people love people like they love chocolate. What do I love about you? What you do for me. How you make me feel. A good part of modern Western thinking has been built on that kind of love. And that's why everybody gets told, if they're no longer providing what you need, it's time to get out of there. Why? Because the love, to start off with, was self-serving. What do you do for me? What have you done for me today? Right? But if you're talking about the neshama experiencing love, the neshama's experience of love will be altogether different. It will be enriching. It will be meaningful. It will be altruistic. It will be transcendent. Think about the love that a parent has for a child, especially when it's a young child. Okay, let's put it a little differently. Imagine if one of your friends phoned you up and said, you cannot believe what happened last night. Cannot believe what happened. What happened? At 2 a.m., somebody woke me up. 2 a.m. They woke me up and they insisted that they needed to eat. And I went and I didn't complain and I prepared them food to eat. After I fed them, they didn't even say thank you. All they expected was that I was going to prepare them a place that they could then sleep. But the unfortunate reality is that they ate too fast and they overate and they actually felt sick from eating. Now it's 3 a.m. and they're feeling sick. But don't worry, I nursed them back to feeling better and I looked after them and I put them unfortunately they couldn't sleep in the same spot anymore because they got sick all over the place. I had to put them somewhere else and I had to change linen in the middle of the night. No sooner did I finish the whole thing, I eventually went to sleep, fell asleep. The next thing, they're knocking on the door again. They needed help with something else. And you know what? I didn't lose my cool once. I would say, wow, you're an amazing human being, right? Amazing human being. Then they tell you it's their 3-month-old baby. What do you say now? Meh, we've all been there. You're no longer a superhuman. Now you're just a parent. So does the parent think I'm superhuman for doing that? For waking up and for feeding the baby and changing the baby and cleaning the mess and whatever? Yeah, am I superhuman? No. I love them so much, I don't even feel the problem. I'm not saying I'm not tired. I'm not saying that I don't get irritable. But I love them so much that the fact that I'm tired and irritable is no longer an issue. That's a different kind of love. That's a different kind of love. That's the kind of love that it doesn't in any way depend on what you do for me. It's all about what I do for you. I love you so much. That's why I'm doing and doing and doing. So now when you talk about love as a midah, and we're describing the nefesh elokis, the divine soul, so we're speaking about a faculty of the neshama called love. That's going to be that sort of dedication directed towards God. The kind of dedication that a person would have to a dear friend, to a spouse, to a child, directed towards God. It's not reciprocal. It's not if you, then I. It's absolute. Absolute dedication, absolute willingness to do what Hashem wants. Now let's talk about another one. Let's talk about fear, which is possibly the most misunderstood topic in a good portion of Jewish literature. Fear of God. And you know what's misunderstood? It comes this time of the year, coming up for Rosh Hashanah, and many people get onto the fear of God bandwagon. Fear of God, fire and brimstone. And you know, it was really interesting because I did a little survey on social media a few days ago to ask what people think of fire and brimstone sermons. You know, when the rabbis get into their fire and brimstone mood around Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur time, what does it do for you? And there were varied responses, but some people actually very much welcome it. I don't know if they have a certain masochistic element to their personality, whatever, but some people, they want to hear that. They want to hear, that. So fear is one of the most mistranslated words in a good portion of Jewish literature. Fear of God, right? Fear of God. Who wants to fear God? Why would you want to fear God? Sounds like a terrible thing. So again, if it's a primal, primitive response, then fear is what we call fight or flight. which effectively means there's a threat, and I have two choices to either escape or neutralize the threat. And that is how fear presents itself in most literature and in most subjects, most topics. That's how we look at fear. But here's a different type of fear. As an example, it's not the only example, but it just illustrates a little bit more of a deeper kind of fear. When a couple is in love, is love good enough to sustain their relationship? Now, it's an interesting question. See, if you read all the novels and the scripts of Disney and all these things, love is the answer. Nobody knows what the question is, but love is the answer. There's this sense in the world that love is something that stimulates you to forever. If you have love, you're good. If a couple falls in love, they're great. And as long as they can keep loving each other, everything will be fantastic. The Torah says, you know what? If you want to sustain a relationship, you also have to have fear. Not fear of each other, God forbid. That would never be healthy. But you have to have fear of what would happen if I would in any way damage this relationship. That is healthy fear. That's healthy fear because I'm so concerned that I may do something that could undermine this relationship that I'll be vigilant not to do anything that could damage it. Am I afraid? Am I fight or flight? Do I have, adrenaline running through my system? Not at all. But I have a clear, vivid awareness of how important it is to preserve this relationship because I fear what could happen if we lose it. Sometimes that's critical for the sustainability of a relationship. Not just what we love about each other, but the recognition of what we may stand, God forbid, to lose without each other. Same principle with Hashem. When we talk about fear of God, most people think, fear of God, lightning bolt. That's fear of God. What if I step out of line and Hashem is dissatisfied with me and then he smites me? I think smite is a very religious sounding word, don't you think? Like, nobody else uses it except if you're a scholar of religion. Smite. God's going to smite me. Comes to Rosh Hashanah, and I'm afraid. It's the day of judgment, and he's pulling out the ledger, and he's going to see my name, and he's going to see my record, and he's going to put out his scale, and all the good stuff on the right side, and all the bad stuff on the left side, and that kind of fear is primitive. But if I come to Rosh Hashanah and I think for a moment, what do I stand, God forbid, to lose if I've disconnected from Hashem? That's what I'm afraid. Not what he will do to me. But I'm afraid that there's so much that is at stake over here that I dare not jeopardize that relationship. That's a whole different kind of fear. I'm not afraid that on Rosh Hashanah Hashem's going to say, this misfortune, God forbid, is in my future. I'm afraid that Hashem's going to say, listen, I don't think we have a connection anymore. I haven't seen you for so long. And then there's higher and deeper levels of fear as well. So now the question is, how does the neshama interface with the world in order to achieve these different experiences? So v'hamidos, in the middle of the page, just after the full stop. V'hamidos shenyira ve'ahava. So when we speak about the midos, the faculties of response, the subjective faculties that the neshama has, shehein yira ve'ahava, which can broadly be categorized in two groups. The group called Yira, fear of God. You'll notice that he puts it first because that's typically where people begin their spiritual journey, is first with a sense of fear, a more primitive fear. Ve'ahava, then a person progresses and graduates to a point of achieving a sense of love of God. Ve'anfehen ve'toldoisehen, as well as all the different branches of what love translates into and what fear translates into. Because, of course, you understand that every one of them has multiple ways of expressing themselves, right? Love is not a singular expression. Fear is not a singular expression. There are many different branches of what exactly that could mean. So, for example, if you love, then you're also going to be generous, or you're generous in your time, generous in your emotions, etc. Ve'toldoisehen, as well as the offshoots of both love and fear, because basically what happens is that we get what we call fully developed emotions and we get what we call secondary emotions. So, for example, love will propel me to be excited to do something. I love it. I love the idea. I definitely want to be part of it. And then I need the tulda, the next step, which is to stay enthusiastic, because the nature of human beings is that we run out of steam. We start off with a lot of energy and we run out of steam. So all of those meluvashes b'kima mitzvahs b'maise uvedibur, those are expressed through actually doing mitzvahs. Whether we do the mitzvah in action or whether we express a mitzvah in speech. Which mitzvah? There's only one mitzvah that relies on speech in order to be fulfilled. Shehu Talmud Torah, that's the abbreviation. Shekeneged kulon. That refers to Torah learning, which corresponds in a certain regard to all of the other mitzvahs. What's he doing for us here is framing the idea of mitzvahs as something a lot more than just simple actions. Why? So here's where it gets interesting. Ki ha'ahava hi sheresh kol ramach mitzvos aseh. Because love towards Hashem is the root by which a person comes to any of the 248 positive mitzvahs in the Torah. And the fulfillment of all mitzvahs are drawn from love towards Hashem. And without love of Hashem, ein lahen kiyum amiti. They will never have a true sustainability. Why? Because a person who fulfills a mitzvah with emes, with truth, that is a person who loves God. Okay, he says God's name. We won't necessarily get into the detail of why he says God's name and not God himself, because it's basically how much of godliness we could relate to. And the person who has such incredible love towards Hashem wants to connect to Hashem in a true way. There is no way to connect to Hashem in a true sense other than to fulfill the 248 mitzvahs, which are considered the limbs of God. Okay. Explain in greater detail elsewhere. So for this evening, let's try and round up this idea of the positive mitzvahs and why they are rooted in love. One of the worst things to do as a Jewish person is to become frum. I don't know at which point frum became a Jewish thing. You know, for those of us from South Africa, we understand that the word is not of Hebrew origin. We understand that there's a big segment of the population over here who calls themselves frum, and it means religious. Religious. How do you rate somebody religiously? How do you know how religious somebody is? So it's very entertaining. You know, as a rabbi, people often come over and they say, "I know a religious person." Right? I know a religious person. What do they mean? They mean a person who does more things than they do. Right? A religious, somebody does more than me. Why? Because the implication of religious or frum is that it is a matter of a list of do's and don'ts And how many of those do's and don'ts you adhere to. Now, did anybody remember when you got your driver's license? Remember getting your driver's license? Yeah? Remember what it was like? All of those years ago. Remember what it was like to get your driver's license? Do you remember what it was like to learn how to drive? So I don't know if there's anybody actually on this Zoom who did not learn how to drive on a manual car. I'm assuming most people here learned how to drive on a manual car. So many things to remember. Oh my gosh. You have to remember to hold the steering wheel. You have to remember to look where you're going. You have to remember to look in the mirror to see what's behind you. You have to remember to check your blind spots if you're going to change lanes. You have to remember to indicate before you turn. You have to remember to put in the clutch at the right time to be able to change the gear. You have to remember which one is the brake and which one is the accelerator. You have to remember to put in the clutch at the same time you put in the brake. You have to remember not to put the thing into the wrong gear. You have to watch your speedometer. You have to pay attention to the other cars. It's so many things. Any new learner driver, as humorous it is for us, because, we're veterans, we laugh. Don't worry, you'll get used to it. And they're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to, I don't have enough hands for this. Any learner driver is like someone trying to be from. I got to do this, and I got to do that, and I got to do the next thing. And it's all so overwhelming. There are laws about how you eat. There's laws about how you sleep. There's laws about how you dress. There's laws about which days you can do what, who you can talk to, and what you can talk about. So many laws. I feel like a learner driver. So many things. Now, why do people actually get their license, if you think about it? Maybe today's a different world, and maybe they don't even need a license. They could just use public transport and Ubers. Maybe they don't need a license, bichlal. Why does a teenager want their license? Why? Because they love the thought of the independence. If anybody would explain to them how many lifts they are going to have to do, if anybody would explain to them how frustrating it is to sit in traffic, if anybody would explain to them what the maintenance of a car takes out of you financially, they would not be so enthusiastic to get their license. What overrides all of that? They love the thought of the independence. It's a stage in your life where the more independent you could become, the better. And all they dream of is to be able to drive down the road without mom next to them saying you're going too fast. They want to be able to go when they want, come when they want. When you love something, the details are no longer obstacles. So, all of Judaism is divided into two groups, positive mitzvahs and negative mitzvahs. There are 248 classes of positive and 365 classes of negative mitzvahs. What drives a person to do a mitzvah be'emes, with integrity, with sincerity, with consistency, with truth, is love. Next time we'll talk about the 365 don'ts. That's motivated by fear. But what's motivated by love? The do's. So now, again, there's two ways to look at it. When a man buys his wife flowers, yes? I don't know if you've ever seen this in real life, but when a man buys his wife flowers, there are two ways that a man could buy his wife flowers. One way is that before they got married, they went to marriage prepare classes with somebody, and the person said to them, make sure that every once in a while you buy your wife flowers, because that way she'll know that you care about her. So the guy went, and he put a reminder in his phone every 3 weeks to beep on a Friday morning, get flowers. And that's what he does. And then Nebuch, when he has to upgrade his phone to a new phone, and he loses some of the information because he's not so tech savvy, so he didn't really know how to save his things into the cloud, and now he loses it, and now he's stressed. What am I going to do now? Have flowers. Which day was the flowers? But if a person loves his wife, and therefore he knows that she loves flowers, and he cares about her, then he's not getting flowers because it's in the diary. It's not a task. It's not a chore. It's not on the to-do list. You're the person I want to do things for, so this is what I'm doing. So that's how it is with a mitzvah. If you do a mitzvah because you're frum, then basically what you do is you created a very fixed structure in your life. And that structure says, at this time, on this day, I do this mitzvah. Check the box. And at that time, I do that mitzvah. And if, God forbid, something should occur that interrupts my schedule, well, that's just unfortunate. I can't do this mitzvah right now. And I'm pretty sure that there is scope within Judaism that says, if you have circumstances beyond your control, you're excused from the mitzvah, which is correct. But if I love God, then I wake up every single day saying, what can I do for you today? When is the opportunity? It's 6 a.m. I need to go to shul. When is the opportunity to go to shul? When is the opportunity to put on tefillin? If something occurs that is outside of my schedule, interferes with my schedule, and now I cannot do a mitzvah, I'm not going to turn around and say, no, okay, whatever, I'm excused. And I say, but I love you, God, so what can I do in place of this? How can I catch it up? Two completely different realities. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe teaches us that the true motivator of mitzvahs is love of God. And again, I'll repeat the words that he says. Ki hamekayemon be'emes. A person who keeps a mitzvah with truth, hu ha'oyev Hashem Hashem. That's a person who loves God's name. V'chafetz adavka boy be'emes. And he wants to truly connect with Hashem. He doesn't want to arbitrarily connect to Hashem. He doesn't want to pass his test and get an A. He actually wants to connect. It's like the failure of the school system, right? What does the school system do? It encourages kids to get marks, rather than encouraging children to love and embrace wisdom and knowledge. What do we want? We don't want a whole lot of robotic adherence to a set of laws. We want people who love God. That's what the neshama wants. This neshama that's looking for an interface with the world. It's just not looking to just like plug holes and say, okay, here are things. I've got 70, 80, 90, 100 years on this earth. So during that time, I've got X amount of mitzvahs I've got to fulfill. The neshama says, I want to have a passionate experience of finding God in every area of my life where He's available. So therefore, hamekaimon be'emes. Every time I fulfill a mitzvah, I'm doing so with my full truth. Not just with my superficial side, the part of me that goes through motions. I'm doing it with my heart. It's where I want to be. It's what I want to do. So therefore, the point that he's making here is, when Hashem gave us the Torah at Sinai, He effectively gave us two original laws. I am Hashem your God. Do not have other gods. I am Hashem your God is the summary of every positive mitzvah that exists. It's a declaration of the fact that I believe there's a God. Why else would I be strapping those black straps around my arm? It's a declaration that I believe that there's a God. I am Hashem your God who took you out of Egypt. In other words, I love you. Why do I do a mitzvah? I love you back. That is the true foundation on which real mitzvahs, real dedication to God lives. And the Alter Rebbe wants us to be clear that if we fall into the trap of just tracking behavior, like some kind of a loyalty program, right? How many things have I done? Am I going to get a prize? It's like vitality, vitality. I went to gym. Can you give me a prize? Versus, I went to gym because I love life and I want to be healthy. See the difference? You don't have to keep incentivizing the person who loves life. You don't have to keep incentivizing the person who loves God. So that's what the neshama wants, and it has to find a way to get that into thought, to express it through speech, and to turn it into action. And then, please God, next week we'll look at the flip side. What about the part of us that keeps us out of trouble? The part of us that helps us to avoid doing what's wrong. Okay, but that we'll do, please God, next time.